Family gatherings at Claire's place always felt like closed-door meetings. Executive sessions where blood got a seat at the table and I waited in the hallway, coat still on. The house was big, warm, and curated to look inviting. But it wasn't. Not to me. It smelled like eucalyptus and distrust. I sat near the exit. Always. Not because I wanted to leave, but because it was understood that I might. That I could. That I wasn't part of the lock-in. Everything about that house was deliberate. The framed diplomas in the hallway, the perfectly arranged, candid family photos on the mantel, the way Claire angled the blinds just so the light would fall across the piano no one played. Even the dog had posture. I tried, in the early years, to lean into it. I shaved cleaner. I spoke softer. I bought clothes with collars even when I didn't need to. For the girls' birthdays, I wrapped the gifts in tissue and ribbons instead of newspaper and duct tape like I had for my nephew. I let Claire tell me what they liked, even when I knew she was guessing. I never knew what actually made them happy. I only knew what didn't. Their father, the real one, had left years before I showed up. Vanished. Popped in once for Madison's graduation and again briefly when Elise turned 16. Long enough to give her a car key and pose for a photo, he posted on his Facebook with a caption about how proud he was. It got likes. Claire saw it. Said nothing. So I became the placeholder. The man who showed up for the things that didn't get social media posts, dental bills, car insurance, busted plumbing. I paid for Elise's new laptop when hers crashed before senior year midterms. I spent 3 weekends crawling under that house rerouting ductwork because the system was hemorrhaging heat. No one asked me to do it. No one thanked me for doing it. But when it was done, they were warm. And I was cold. Claire's father once asked me what I did for a living. Not because he didn't know, but because he wanted me to say it out loud in front of everyone. Construction contracts, I said. Mostly HVAC. And he nodded like I'd confessed to something, like manual labor was a condition. The others were in finance, real estate, private school boards. I was there to fix things, but not to belong. The girls never looked me in the eye when they didn't have to. And when they did, it was often with the forced politeness of hotel clerks. I learned to read their tone like blueprint symbols. Thanks meant, you did what was expected. That's fine meant, I won't fight you here. They never raised their voices, but they never lowered their guard either. Every exchange was a transaction. And I was the card that always got swiped. Still, I stayed. I stayed because I thought patience was the price of family. That, eventually, consistency would be noticed. That one day, I'd be sitting at that long mahogany table and feel like I had a place. Not at the end, not by the door, but somewhere between them. Shoulder to shoulder. Like a real father. But there was a tone to that house. A subtle choreography. Claire's wine was never more than half full. The girls never spoke to me directly unless something needed fixing. The thermostat. The garage door opener. The finances quietly when the ex was late, again. They only came to me when something wasn't working. The silence was louder than contempt. At least contempt is honest. Still, I stayed. I told myself that family is a structure, and someone has to hold the beams while the roof settles. I had done it before. I had been the only adult in the room plenty of times, even before I met Claire. I could carry the weight. I knew how to show up for people who didn't ask, didn't notice, and wouldn't thank you after. But eventually you start hearing the creaks in the floorboards. The subtle tilt of a house that no longer wants to hold your weight. That night, the night the script changed, I could feel it coming before it arrived. We were in the living room. Claire's brother had brought documents, something about the family trust, property titles, revisions to the medical proxy. The girls were home, but mostly upstairs, emerging only when food was mentioned. I had grilled chicken on the deck earlier, checked the propane tank, made sure the table was clean, the chairs dry. No one noticed. They ate. I cleaned again. I'd offered a suggestion during the conversation. That was my mistake. Claire was talking about the estate and the division of assets if something were to happen, God forbid, and I shared what I'd learned after handling my father's probate years back. I didn't press. I didn't make it about me. Just a practical note, drawn from experience. I thought I was being helpful. Claire turned to me mid-sentence. Not later. Not when it was over. Mid-sentence. Don't interfere. Her voice wasn't raised. That's what made it worse. It was sharp, clean, managerial. Her brother looked down. Her father looked through me. And then, before I could even decide how to respond, Madison spoke. She didn't even turn her head. "You're not our father." 7 words. Not emotional. Not heated. Just structural. Like bricks laid down in a wall that had already been framed. I looked at her. She didn't look back. Claire didn't flinch. Elise said nothing. That was the moment. That was the final placement of the beam I had spent years holding up. I didn't argue. Didn't plead. Didn't ask Claire to soften it or explain that it was just a bad day or teenage angst dressed up as autonomy. I just nodded. Stepped back. Picked up my jacket from the chair behind me. The one by the door, and walked out. No slammed doors. Just the click of a man finally closing one. No one followed. No one called out. Not even the dog got up. It was a clean exit. The kind that only happens when people expect you to leave, and are relieved when you do. Outside, the air was colder than I'd remembered. I stood on the porch for a moment, looking at the windows, their light gold and flickering, like something sacred. But there was nothing sacred in there. Just protocol. Just inheritance. Just a script that had never written me in. I got in the truck. Turned the key. Sat with the engine humming. There was nothing left to say. I had tried. For years. I had shown up, paid in full, did the invisible work of a man who wanted to build something permanent. But you can't build permanence in a place where you're considered furniture. I pulled out of the driveway. The house got smaller in the rear view. That perfect house. That immaculate, impersonal, surgically polite house. I thought about all the ways a man can disappear. Slowly, over time, piece by piece. This was just the last piece. Claire didn't stop me. She didn't follow me down the steps or call my name into the dark. She didn't even open the door to pretend she might change her mind. When I looked back, the porch light was still on, casting soft yellow over the welcome mat I had bought and power washed. But the door stayed shut. That silence was the answer, and it was louder than anything else that could have been said. She had made her decision before I ever reached for my jacket. That's what people don't understand. Moments like that, they aren't spontaneous. They're rehearsed, played out in the mind until the outcome feels inevitable. Claire didn't act in anger. She acted in alignment, in sync with a truth she had always known and finally stopped concealing. I didn't sleep at my place that night. I didn't go to a bar or call a friend. I sat in the parking lot behind my office building, the kind with yellow-lit vending machines and cracked pavement that smells like burnt gravel in the rain. The silence was total, not peaceful, just blank, like the static before a radio tunes itself. By morning, I was back in my apartment, the one I'd never fully moved out of, just let fade into half-storage over the years. Claire had always said I should cut the cord, make the house our home, but I think she liked that I still had a space of my own. It gave her permission to treat my presence as optional. That morning, I aligned reality with their words. I didn't send a text, didn't write a speech or request a conversation. I wasn't interested in catharsis. I wasn't looking to be heard. I was only interested in the facts, so I acted on them. First was the insurance. Claire was listed as a dependent under my health policy. I removed her. I clicked a box and confirmed the change. The screen flashed green. Done. No calls. No fight. Just deletion. Then came the bank. We had one shared account. Claire called it the house fund, though I was the only one funding it. Every utility bill, every grocery sweep, every maintenance call for the furnace, the roofing, the tree removal when the storm came through, all of it passed through that account. Quietly, without acknowledgement, as if it were simply supposed to be there. I emptied it, not out of vengeance, out of alignment. I left what she had deposited, $137.46. Not a cent more. I transferred the rest to my private account and closed the joint one entirely. A clean severance. Then I moved to the automatic payments. The phone plan in my name. The gas bill, my card. Water, trash, internet, streaming services, security system, the Spotify family plan even though I only ever used the free version. All of it, me. Every quiet convenience in that house was tethered to me like a shadow. I untethered it. One by one, I severed the links. Click, cancel, disable, remove. Took 3 hours. 3 hours to erase a decade of unpaid debts masquerading as shared life. The digital keys came last. Claire insisted on using a smart lock system. She liked being able to track when the girls came and went, check the app, get alerts. My login was the administrator account. I disabled my own access. Then I paused the backup codes and revoked her override privileges. If she wanted to reset it, she'd have to call the provider and verify identity without my authorization. I imagined her face as the app blinked offline. I imagined the cold realization crawling up her throat when the system she took for granted stopped obeying. By noon, I had finished. My phone started buzzing by 12:17 p.m. First, it was a neighbor. Friendly, older guy, always waved at me when I mowed the lawn. Hey, sorry to bother. But Claire said the garage isn't opening. Thought it might be a power thing? Then the property manager. Mr. Caldwell, we received notice of discontinued payment for the HOA dues. Just wondering if there's been a change in arrangement? Then Madison. She texted first. Just 2 words, too much. I didn't respond. Then she called. I let it ring. She called again. On the 3rd try, I answered. What are you doing? She snapped. No hello. I said nothing. I mean it. What the hell is this? Mom can't access anything. The bills are bouncing. My Spotify's gone. Are you trying to screw us over? No, I said evenly. I'm just agreeing with you. There was a pause. What? You said I'm not your father, I said. So I stopped acting like one. Her breath caught. I could hear it. That split-second inhale, like she hadn't expected her own words to boomerang back with such precision. That was in the moment, she muttered. It was tense. You know how family dinners get. No, I said. I don't. I let the silence stretch until she broke it. Okay, so what, you're punishing us? That's what this is? No, I repeated. I'm just removing confusion. You made a clear statement. I accepted it. You're being a child. No, I said again. I'm being honest. Something this family hasn't done in a long time. She didn't have a response for that. Just a click. The line went dead. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt clean. That night, Claire still didn't call. The next morning, I expected something. A message. An email. Even just an alert from the house. Nothing. She was leaning into the silence. Maybe out of pride. Maybe out of calculation. But that absence, that stubborn refusal to break the vacuum, said everything. She wasn't trying to win me back. She was testing to see how far I'd go. She still thought I would blink first. So I took it further. I drafted a formal notice, not legal, not hostile, just factual. I itemized the payments I had been making monthly, broke it down by category, listed dates, a digital paper trail of everything I had covered, silently, since moving in. I attached it to an email with the subject line, clarifying boundaries. The message was short. Claire, in light of recent conversations, I've removed myself from all systems where my presence had been assumed without consent. Attached is a record of my contributions for transparency. Please update your arrangements accordingly. Michael. I hit send. 20 minutes later, I got a read receipt. No reply. I didn't need one. By evening, Claire had called the bank. Tried to reauthorize the joint account. Failed. Then called the internet provider. Hit the wall of password protections. The locks were changing, and she didn't have the keys anymore. I imagined her walking through that perfect house. Lights flickering from power cuts, internet buffering, thermostat unresponsive, water bill unpaid. The shell of convenience peeling away to reveal the truth. It wasn't the house that ran itself. It was me. I had been the infrastructure, the spine. Now she was learning what it feels like when the spine walks away. On the 3rd day, Elise messaged me. Her text was shorter than Madison's. No greeting. Just, can you fix the Wi-Fi? I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I'm not your technician. Contact your provider. She left me on read. That was the moment I really knew it had landed. The line had been drawn. They could no longer pretend I was a silent fixture. A default presence. A resource with a name but not a face. I had become what they always treated me as, absent. But now they would feel it. Not in rage. Not in retribution. But in the cold, clear consequence of declaring a man unnecessary, and then needing him. That's when it all flipped. They weren't ignoring me anymore. They were chasing ghosts, trying to dial numbers that no longer connected, expecting routines to resume without resetting the system. But the system had been mine. And now the silence was theirs to live with. By noon the following day, the real collapse began. I was at my desk when my phone rang again. Same number, same ringtone. I let it go to voicemail. 3 minutes later, a text arrived. The power's out. Claire says it's been hours. No greeting, no punctuation, just panic in sentence form. Then came another. The keypads aren't working. She's locked out of the garage. I read it, then turned off my phone. I didn't owe them rescue. Not anymore. I had already given them a decade of parachutes. But they were scrambling now. Scrambling because the machine had stopped humming. The invisible systems they never noticed until they failed were now failing in unison. The credit card autopays. The utility autopilots. The scheduled deposits. The ensured comfort of knowing someone else was always handling it. That someone had stopped. The next voicemail was from the property management company. Hi, Mr. Caldwell. Just confirming. We've received a cancellation notice on the rental insurance tied to the property at 2715 Maple Ridge. The policyholder name is still listed under your record, but the payment method was declined. Could you call us back? I didn't. Let them feel it. Let the emails pile up. Let the system blink red long enough to force a reckoning. This was the part they'd never prepared for. The absence of a man who never demanded thanks but expected, on some level, not to be erased. That evening, I checked Claire's social media. Not something I normally did, but curiosity has its own kind of justice. Nothing had been posted. No photos. No cryptic quotes about growth or letting go. Just silence. Which, for Claire, meant the narrative hadn't been crafted yet. The story was still out of her control. That was another thing I had carried. The illusion. I was the quiet man behind the curtain, pulling levers, making the family machine look elegant. Now the curtain was gone, and the wires were exposed. The next call came from Madison. This time I picked up. Her voice was brittle, tightly wound. Look, she said. I don't know what you're trying to prove, but this isn't just affecting Mom. Elise can't even log into her school portal. The tuition payment bounced. They're saying she's at risk for a hold. I waited 3 seconds before responding. She's in college, I said. Her father can assist her. Don't do that. Do what? Play dumb, she snapped. You know her father won't help. He never has. Then maybe you shouldn't have told the only man who ever did that he didn't belong. She went silent. Words have weight, I said. You threw yours like knives and didn't expect blood. I heard her breath catch. But I wasn't done. For 10 years, I covered that house like a roof. I let you pretend your family was whole. I signed the checks. I made the appointments. I sat in the background like a hired extra in someone else's home movie. You told me I wasn't your father, so I've stopped acting like one. That's not what I meant, she whispered. But it's what you said. Another pause. Then, quietly, you could have just talked to us. I did, I said. Every bill I paid was a conversation. Every car repair, every tuition check, every weekend I spent fixing the deck instead of resting. Those were all things I said. You just never listened. She hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I cooked dinner for one. I hadn't done that in years, really cooked, not just reheated leftovers from a table that never had a seat for me. It was quiet, clean. No background noise of forced civility or subtle condescension. Just silence and the sizzle of a pan. I slept well for the first time in months. But silence never lasts. The next morning, Claire finally broke. She showed up at my apartment. No call. No warning. Just her face behind the frosted glass. Distorted but unmistakable. I let her knock 3 times before I opened the door. She looked tired. Not in the usual "I've had a long week" way. No, this was something deeper. A kind of fatigue that came from the sudden realization that a world she thought was stable had been built on someone else's shoulders. She didn't greet me. "Michael," she said. "What are you doing?" I leaned against the doorframe. "Living in reality." "This isn't a game," she said. "You've shut off the utilities. The bills are overdue. Elisa's tuition. Not my responsibility." Her mouth opened. Closed. She tried again. "We had an agreement." "No," I said. "We had an arrangement. One that functioned on mutual respect. You broke that." She shook her head slowly, eyes welling. "You're overreacting." I laughed once, sharp. "You call this overreaction? You watched your daughter call me irrelevant and said nothing." She was angry. "No, Claire." She was clear. "You were all clear. You just never thought I'd believe you." She stepped forward, voice cracking. "You're punishing them." "No," I said. "I'm holding them accountable. There's a difference." The tears came then. Real ones. I didn't look away. "I didn't know it would go this far," she whispered. "That's the thing," I said. "You never thought it would go anywhere. Because you never thought I'd walk." Silence again. Finally, she asked, "Is this what you want? To burn it all down?" I held her gaze. I didn't start the fire. I just stopped pretending it wasn't burning. She left without saying goodbye. The next day, Elise called me. Not to scream. Not to accuse. To plead. "Michael," she said softly. "I know things are bad, but I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "You said nothing," I told her. "I didn't know what to say." "That's the problem," I said. "Silence isn't neutral. It's consent." She went quiet. Then, "I don't have anyone else." "You do," I said. "You just never needed him until now." Her voice broke. "He won't help. He hasn't even replied to my texts." "Then welcome to adulthood." There was a long pause. Then, almost inaudible, "I'm sorry." I didn't reply, because that word "sorry" doesn't build anything. It doesn't pay for what's broken. It doesn't scrub away years of dismissal or teach a child to see the man in front of them. Sorry was too late. That night, Claire sent one last message. "I wish it hadn't come to this." I didn't reply, because it always came to this. It had just taken them this long to see it. They had built a house on a man's back and called it stability. Now the man was standing up, and the house was learning what gravity really feels like. The ending wasn't loud. Claire didn't come storming back. There were no suitcases on the porch, no final argument echoing into the street. She just packed, quietly, over the course of a few days. A few boxes, a few bags. No announcement, no ceremony. It was surgical, like she was removing a tumor. I watched her through the security feed. The one she never bothered to change after the split. Her car pulled into the driveway mid-morning. She entered using a temporary code, one I'd left active for 7 days because I still believed in giving people time to act with dignity. She didn't bring help. Didn't ask for mine. I suppose some part of her still had enough pride to lift her own boxes. That house, her house, became something else once it emptied. Hollow but honest. No more false dinners, no more theater. Just walls, windows, and the quiet hum of things left unsaid. I didn't leave. That's what people get wrong. They always ask, "When did you move out?" I didn't. I stayed. I just stopped holding together a structure that had already erased me. No more transfers. No more fixes. No more carrying the emotional load like a mule that had forgotten it could buck. I had carried the silence, the rejection, the blame, the awkward silences at Christmas, the conversations that stopped when I entered the room, and now I set it down. Let someone else pick it up. Let the ones who benefited from my labor figure out where to plug in the vacuum or how to reset the circuit breaker. Let them feel the draft in winter and the sweat in summer. Let them pay for comfort. Let them earn it. A week after Claire left, A letter arrived addressed to me. Handwritten, blue ink, slightly shaky. It was from Elise. I didn't open it right away. It sat on my desk for 3 days. I thought maybe it was an apology. Maybe an explanation. Maybe a last attempt to stitch something together out of threads already snapped. When I finally opened it, it wasn't long. Michael, I don't know if you'll read this. Maybe you'll tear it up. Maybe you've already moved on. But I needed to say thank you. For everything. Even the things I didn't notice until they stopped. I was a child when you came into our lives. And I guess I stayed one. You didn't deserve how we treated you. I know that now. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know I see it clearly, even if it's too late. Elise, I folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, put it in the drawer. Not because I was angry, but because sometimes regret is the right ending. Not resolution, not reunion, just recognition. Madison never wrote. Claire never reached out again. It was over. That realization didn't come with a rush of freedom. Came slowly, like heat returning to frostbitten limbs. Not pain exactly, just sensation, just clarity. I woke up earlier, ate slower, walked longer. No more watching the clock to make sure dinner was ready before the girls came home. No more double-checking the thermostat or the grocery list or whether the driveway needed to be cleared before morning. I had space again. Not peace. Not yet. But room to breathe. And in that space, the question started to form. Was I wrong? That's what people want to ask but won't. Was it too much? Was I cruel? Was I vindictive for pulling away, for cutting off the money, the services, the comfort? Was I petty? Let me answer that plainly. I wasn't angry when I made the choice. I was awake. For too long, I told myself that love was endurance. That fatherhood was a series of sacrifices made quietly, without expectation. That presence would eventually be seen, that loyalty would be returned, that children raised by example would someday follow it. But that's not always true. Sometimes your example is ignored. Sometimes your presence is dismissed. Sometimes the ones you carry come to believe the ride is free, and that they're owed it. That's when you have to stop. Not to teach a lesson. Not to get even, but to remember you exist, that your back has limits, that your time has value, that your love is not a blank check. When Madison looked me in the eye, or rather refused to, and said, "You're not our father," she wasn't just stating a fact. She was drawing a line. She was making sure I knew my place. So I stepped into it, and found it empty, because I was never standing in a place. I was the place. The floor beneath their feet, the insulation in the walls, the system humming in the background, keeping the house warm. And when I stepped out, the house went cold. That wasn't cruelty. That was cause and effect. You don't get to tell a man he's disposable and then be surprised when he disappears. You don't get to strip someone of identity and still demand obligation. You don't get to say you're not my father and then ask him to pay your tuition. Love without respect is slavery. And I was a slave for too long. Now, I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. I'm not waiting for apologies or letters or recognition. I've moved on, not from them but from the role they never let me play. If they call again, I'll listen. If they ask for help, I'll weigh it. But I'll never again carry what isn't mine. I'll never again finance my own erasure. Because here's the truth no one tells you. A stepfather is not a second-class parent. He's not a placeholder or a benchwarmer. He is a man who chooses to stand in the gap someone else left behind, and that choice is sacred. But it only matters if the family receiving it understands what it costs. They didn't, so I stopped paying. You can call it cruel. You can call it cold. But I call it honest. And I'd do it again. Because if I don't value myself, no one else will. So now I ask you, whoever hears this, would you have stayed? Would you have kept paying for a role they refused to let you hold? Would you have endured it just to be useful? Or would you have walked out too, the moment they reminded you you were never really inside? You tell me, was I wrong? Or was I the only one finally telling the truth?